And as a member of the Seanad Special Select Committee on Brexit, and as someone who is extremely committed to avoiding the return of a hard border on this island, it's a huge priority for me, both politically and personally. And I also want to give credit to the chairperson of the Seanad Special Select Committee, Senator Neil Richmond, who is doing a great job. I think it's to our credit that Brexit hasn't been seen as a partisan issue, and as the negotiations have progressed, the Irish position on the need for a legally operable backstop has been made crystal clear by the Tánaiste and our diplomatic officials, and this has been recognised and supported in these Houses. The need for such an insurance policy to avoid the return of a hard border has been agreed and understood within the Oireachtas, but also across 26 other EU capitals. That isn't something that's taken for granted, and it's a result of years of careful work and preparation. As the Tánaiste may know, I was in Norway last week speaking with members of their Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee about my own legislative work, and they told me how they had been to visit the border counties and had physically walked across the invisible border. And that kind of experience is invaluable in making sure the importance of the issue is understood across Europe, and it takes a lot of time and effort, and that work is very much recognised and appreciated. So for me, in preparing for today's debate, I have to admit that the situation feels different compared to previous updates and discussions we've had in this House. 30 days out from a Brexit deadline that's already been postponed once, the sense of fear I have when thinking about the paths towards a workable solution is much greater than it has been previously. So I can't even imagine what it's like for the people who are living on the border. So I look to Westminster and the extremist positions being outlined there, and it's difficult, really difficult to comprehend. If a deal or an extension aren't agreed before the European Council on October 17th, the prospect of a disastrous no-deal Brexit becomes a reality, and it truly is a frightening prospect, as we all know. There was a discussion in the Dáil this afternoon about the so-called non-paper UK proposals leaked last night in relation to border posts, and they were rightly condemned both by the government and opposition parties, and even the British Prime Minister needed to quickly distance himself from these documents. While nothing else has been forthcoming in the meantime, it's a recognition of how grossly unacceptable these proposals are. The idea that a 20-kilometre zone bookended by border posts could credibly solve the problem is an affront to our hard-won peace and an insult to all those living on this island. It's particularly troubling that the UK government and those negotiating on their behalf seem to think that the issue is with the location of border infrastructure and not the fact that it could be erected in the first place. We must be clear on this. There is absolutely no mandate for the return of a hard border on this island. It would run contrary to the Good Friday Agreement, and it cannot be allowed to happen. And this was stated firmly in the Dáil this afternoon, and it should be restated here in the Seanad. In my view, it's also important that we try to consider exactly why proposals like this are being made. Partly, it's down to an inherent disregard for Ireland that has been apparent in Tory politics for decades, but it's also the result of a context that we're soon going to find ourselves in. The proposals around potential border infrastructure or checks taking place at posts removed from the border are being delivered partly because the UK government is trying to reconcile three competing goals that seem fundamentally incompatible. They are effectively trying to square a circle and meet three conditions. One, to leave the European Union in a manner that will satisfy the hard Brexiteers, which seems to mean exiting the customs union and so on. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has been clear about his desire for a clean break from the EU, and his actions have reaffirmed that. Two, the stated commitment to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland, which is an absolute priority for everyone here as well as the rest of the EU 27. And three, to ensure that the integrity of the EU single market is protected and that there isn't a 500-kilometre long gap at what may soon be an external frontier of the European Union. The insistence on the backstop in the first place is recognition that these goals are so close to being incompatible as to require a legal guarantee. Right through these negotiations have effectively sought an insurance policy that would secure the latter two goals against the former. The withdrawal agreement has always allowed that technological solutions and so on could be presented to satisfy all three demands, but they haven't been forthcoming. Yesterday's leaks are just another example. The absurdity of the Johnson government's latest proposals, or lack thereof, must be seen in this light. It's not just a matter of competence. They are the result of attempts to square a circle. What's especially worrying about this situation is that while we can rightly say that it's a problem of British invention, that doesn't do a single thing to bring about a solution. It's a problem made by the UK, but in the event of a no-deal Brexit on the morning of the November 1st, it becomes our problem in a very real manner. There's a cruel irony here in that we'll find ourselves in effectively the same situation as Boris Johnson is now. But of those three goals mentioned previously, a hard Tory Brexit, no border and protecting the EU single market, the first one will have already happened. The UK will have left and we'll be asked how we're going to reconcile the two remaining goals. How are we to secure the external frontier of a 500 person strong continent and trading bloc, while also honouring our commitments to ensure no hardening of the border on this island? That is a question that has yet to be answered. I appreciate the government's position and that in the final days of a years-long negotiation, what is said to be bounded by diplomacy. But I can similarly appreciate the growing frustration at the lack of detail on what exactly we're going to do if the UK crashes out of the EU in a few weeks' time. We hear that discussions are taking place with the European Commission, but we don't have any detail. That is not reassuring as a legislator, and it certainly isn't reassuring to the thousands of people whose jobs and daily lives are waiting for an answer. I don't say any of this to point fingers. Every time I've spoken on this issue, I've noted my respect and appreciation for the leadership shown by the Tánaiste in working, and his officials, in working on the backstop and getting support for it. But if a deal is not agreed and no backstop is in place, then we are going to need an answer to the question very soon. What do we do in relation to the border on the morning of November 1st? What do we do on November 30th and over Christmas and in the months afterwards? In my view, it's undeniable that the rising potential for a no-deal Brexit significantly increases the possibility that a border poll could be called in the coming years. Now, I understand that this sensitive position the government is in, and I really do, but I do believe that this is something we have to start talking about openly and without fear. It needs to happen in a manner that includes everyone on this island and demonstrates a generosity of spirit and a respect for diversity. The Brexit vote itself should act as a stark reminder of what can happen if you go into something without proper planning. But at the moment we find ourselves in a sort of catch-22 position. We can't consider the potential for a border poll without detailed planning. But any efforts to do that detailed planning are similarly rebuffed. In the absence of detailed plans from government, I believe these conversations are happening already in every part of this island. At an academic level, I look at the recent academic project launched by Trinity College UCD, University College London, Ulster University and Queen's University Belfast on what a border poll could mean in practice. But as a member of the Good Friday Committee, I've spoken with both nationalists and unionist communities in the north who engaged with us in good faith, and the overwhelming feeling I got was one of uncertainty. It was about practical questions. If Brexit makes a border poll more likely, then what would that mean in practice? What would the impact be on people's daily lives? What would the impact be on identity? These are questions people are asking, and in my view, we need to start working on answers in a manner that is open, inclusive and generous in spirit. In my view, it's not inflammatory to recognise this possibility and to want to account for it in a sensitive manner. I've said before that I believe this is something that a parliamentarian committee could do in an inclusive manner, working on a cross-party basis. It could be similar to the work of the Good Friday Committee and seek to engage in good faith with all parties based on the principles of consent and parity of esteem. And I have to say, Minister, I'm very passionate about this issue. I think these conversations are going to happen, and while I understand the sensitivity, I think government has a responsibility to be involved. I dearly, dearly hope that deal is reached in the next 30 days, and I really mean that. But if it isn't, it will be incumbent on Government to share its plans with these Houses on how previous commitments will be maintained. In January, before the Brexit deadline in March, the Tánaiste told this House that no matter how good we are at a no-deal contingency planning, we will not be able to create a situation where the status quo persists to a no-deal Brexit. And he went on to say, and I quote, "Deal or no deal, we will insist on finding ways to avoid border infrastructure on this island." And I believe that this is a genuine and strongly felt commitment. But if a deal is not reached in the coming weeks, we urgently need detail on how it will be achieved. And I think everyone in this House will work with you and your department in that regard, Minister. And I thank you again for all of the great work that you're doing, and also our Tánaiste and all the officials that are involved. Thank you so much.